Look at me, I will never pass for a perfect bride.
Disney's 1998 animation Mulan is fondly remembered, in the West at least, and successfully globalized an important facet of ancient China's mythos. So when the Disney remake live action was announced, slated for 2020 before old mate Corona stole the spotlight, the public has had a mixed reaction to the drip feed of information. No lively sing-along musical scores, no comedic drag and side companion in a vein of Eddie Murphy's Mushu, and no Shang Li, the low-key hottest, most sexually confused Disney prince out there. No, he has been split into two identities, a commanding officer and a colleague of a similar rank to Mulan who will presumably have a romantic subplot because the filmmakers were uncomfortable with portraying romance with a power imbalance on the big screen. I'm sure some of these changes are warranted and well considered. For example, a big influence on Disney is that the Chinese audience are seeking a more faithful return to the original myth.
The Mulan Happy Meal, only at McDonald's.
Can somebody say, McDonald's?
Totally fair enough. But some changes, like knocking back the comedic role played by Eddie Murphy, a prominent African-American personality, seem like Disney kinda maybe might be bowing to certain cultural choices by the Chinese audience. And with all this context, it's really up in the air. Will it be a smash hit as a more faithful retelling of the original Mulan mythos, or will it just be kind of forgettable and riddled with questionable improvements like many of the Disney live-action remakes have had so far? Well, I can't exactly critique and review a film which hasn't released, which was the original plan, so instead in this video I'm going to speak about the development of Mulan as a myth, why recent adaptations have made certain creative choices, and hopefully make clear that the evolution of stories, and in particular the retelling of old fables, often have some form of a political or social agenda. So, let's take a stroll through history.
I've heard a great deal about you, Mulan.
Like many iconic fables of many early civilizations, it can be difficult to answer any fundamental questions: who, when, why? And on top of that, for us dumb dopamine-hunting internet dwellers of 2020, there's not much enjoyment in returning to and even reading the original text. Much like the Iliad or the Epic of Gilgamesh, some of the earliest literature of Greece and Sumeria respectively, the first known iteration of Mulan is a ballad, a song or poem that, well, you can read it, but the value is more for the historical fascination, like staring through a zoo's glass barrier into a glimpse of the past, rather than actually consuming the text as literature because, well, it's kind of boring. There's no high drama, it's no page-turning novel, it's a ballad. The Ballad of Mulan was published during the Northern Wei Empire, sometime around the 6th century, and what we find is the skeleton of the eventual animated film that makes its way to screens by the end of the 20th century. A woman takes her father's place in the military after a conscription notice is served on her village. The details of the war itself are skipped over, because, you know, old ballads never give you the details you want. They'll wax lyrical about incestuous relationships between gods and animals, but they won't give you an iota of character development. Looking at you, Iliad. Anyway, when it's all said and done, a decade passes, Mulan is honoured for her service, and after being offered a reward, all she asks for is a camel to take her home to her family, and her comrades are shocked to discover that she was a lady. So that right there is the general framework of the myth that we see, which echoes throughout the centuries. Mulan takes her father's place in a conscription notice, goes to war disguised as a man, and is quite successful. She then forgoes any material honours and instead wishes to return to her family. But with every retelling of the story, the details will wax and wane, develop and regress. Does she tell her parents before she leaves or simply sneak off? Is there a lover involved? Who is the enemy she fights? Does the ruler try to recruit her as a concubine? Does she survive in the end or commit suicide? These are all details that crop up in various retellings of the legend, and some of them, you might guess, are more optimistic and kid-friendly than others. So how come this happens? Well, myths are stories and narratives of fundamental importance to a society that address fundamental concerns, raises difficult questions, and distills some essential meaning that the audience should take home. In a sense, myths and fables are a way that storytellers try to guide a society and ensure that they uphold the esteemed morals of any given day. Of course, the follow-up question is, who are the storytellers? Who decides on the values being pushed? And where does power reside? Naturally, this has changed as society develops, but if we focus momentarily on the ancient world, and in particular Imperial China, it will naturally rest with despots, autocrats, monarchs, essentially whoever controls the military.
Because I have all the swords. I have all the swords.
That's true.
So when we analyze the development of the Mulan myth, and particularly as we catch up to modernity, it becomes apparent that the tweaks made to the story of Mulan often coincide with the political agenda of the given day. So at a glance, a cursory development of the myth looks like this. The Tang dynasty sees Wei Yaunfu's Song of Mulan flesh out her character some more, that she's joining the army because her father is old and in poor health, but the emphasis is on her beauty, femininity, and subservience, where she eagerly returns to her womanly role in the household, the perfect woman. Essentially, the prevailing stereotypes of women that they have to be feminine and beautiful and virtuous and can't play any role in any action ever was reduced slightly. But in place of that, we saw a growth in new elements like eroticism and overt sexualization. Xu Wei released his classic play Mu-Lan Joins the Army towards the close of the 16th century, and boy, we start seeing some changes. In this version, again Mulan joins instead of her ailing father, and having grown up learning martial arts, she's already confident she can compete with any man and pass undetected. Also, we get the added element of Chinese foot binding. If you're not familiar, just don't do a Google search. It's outlawed now for a reason. Because Mulan is the epitome of eroticized beauty, her feet are of course painfully bound so to become mutilated and petite. To overcome this, we get a scandalizing scene of her slowly unbinding her feet so that she can walk like a man, which would typically be a big no-no at the time. But don't worry, she has a magic potion that will again ruin her feet, squash them up good once her quest is finished. So Mulan's parents send her off with a teary farewell to go and fight the bandits, who are this version's big villain. Supreme Commander Jinping. Oh, that's where the name comes from.
Ping. Because Ping did steal my...
Yes, my name is Ping.
Ping promises a reward if Mulan captures the bandit leader, which she does in a glossed over battle, and like usual she chooses to return to her family, capped off with her getting married and blushing at the ceremony, the perfect metaphor to show her return to the subservient wife. The legend saw another revival through the Qing dynasty, with the people of China now again under barbarian rule, and it's from these stories that we see the cinema adaptations of the 20th century take their strongest inspiration. The 1695 novel Romance of Su and Tang was a subtle backlash against the current ruling powers, suggesting that the Qing dynasty did not have the divine right to rule as previous Chinese dynasties had enjoyed. In the novel, while Mulan initially fights on behalf of the Manchu barbarians, the audience is encouraged to sympathize with the Chinese, who are noble and benevolent foes. Being a novel, it's an extensive story with plot twists, character development, befriending the enemy, and star-crossed lovers on opposing sides of the battlefield. Mulan takes part in the battle, fails a rescue mission of her kidnapped Khan, her feudal lord, and is eventually given the task of delivering a love letter for a virtuous Chinese princess she befriends, and then it gets very dark very quickly. Mulan returns home, finding her father already dead, her mum remarried, and with the Khan learning of her womanhood, she faces being forced into joining his concubine, sexual servitude. So she slits her throat on her father's grave, and the story ends with her sister and the princess marrying the same guy, which was kind of a happy note to end with for the time, I guess. About a century later, we get the biography of Extraordinary Mulan, which introduced dark magic, animals imbued with mystical strength, and Mulan again committing suicide after being charged unjustly with treason. 1850 saw publication of the novel Fierce and Filial, with small changes including that Mulan was about to be married to a prized academic before she joins the military, an important showcase of choosing family and duty to country over personal desire. Again, we get magic, Mulan excelling in the military and befriending an enemy princess. And finally, we get this rom-com situation where, after Mulan has given up hope on marrying her fiancé, surprise surprise, he's hired by the military to figure out how to root out the bandits hiding in the mountains. He uses cannons to cause an avalanche, a major plot beat lifted into the Disney adaptation. And then we get a nice ending where they still get happily married and have a child who becomes the Prime Minister? And wrapping up Imperial China's notable adaptations, the 1903 play Mulan Joins the Army introduces the character of Mushu. No, not Eddie Murphy as a fire-breathing dragon, but Mulan's lazy cousin, who exemplifies sloth, cowardice, and all manner of unmanly things, who refuses to join the army and instead stays at home pretending to be a woman while Mulan is off doing her usual soldier thing. And there we have it, a quick run through of how the sentiment and storytelling choices developed through the ages before modern times. The degree to which Mulan is sexualized, or conversely, whether her virtue, chastity, and serene femininity are worshipped, seems to be a reflection on what best represented the social discourse at the time. The Qing dynasty in particular sees a substantial push to revere the Chinese as noble and the true custodians of honor and other respectable qualities, and often ends in Mulan taking her life, either to avoid the salacious evil intentions of her barbarian rulers, or to preserve her honor and dignity in the face of injustice. As a general trend, we see more character and more depth to the story accumulating, and when we look to Disney's 1998 film, we see cheeky references to the old legends as well as entire scenes imported into their work. But many elements, and in particular Mulan's character, personality, and search for a sense of belonging, are entirely creations of modern Disney. But still, the 20th century saw more Mulan. 1939 was a bad time for a lot of people in many places, but China in particular wasn't doing so hot. As a nation still trying to industrialize, and at a time where Japan was still flexing its imperialism by invading Manchuria 8 years prior, and the atrocities at Nanking were only 2 years fresh, the first Mulan hit the big screen. At a time when men were enlisting for war and women were joining the workforce, it seemed appropriate to revive the old legend, but with a new twist. So yes, Mulan's dad is sick and Mulan joins the army. Mulan does well in the army and Mulan is offered any reward but chooses to go home. But for the first time, there's a proper love subplot instead of the usual arranged marriage. Mulan, instead of embodying feminine virtue, is also more laid back, an outcast, a tomboy, and it's okay because she's awesome and a hero. Essentially, this film is a call for resistance, traditional military propaganda. Join the army and you'll be as cool and honored and respected as Mulan. In 1964, Hong Kong put out a musical variant, beating out Disney by about 3 decades. And then, 1976 saw Maxine Hong Kingston bring the myth to the attention of Western audiences with her novel Warrior Woman, a vivid reimagining where Mulan hides her pregnancy and then her child while conscripted, searches for her brother and slays the deplorable emperor and baron. While Kingston's novel is an iteration that hasn't really been drawn on in more modern times, I think it serves as a great punctuation point in the lineage of the myth of Mulan, an immigrant injecting their own flavor and personality into the myth, empowering women and touching on more sophisticated feminine themes like motherhood, but also typically masculine themes like revenge. It really is an exclamation point compared to the question mark that you might put at the original ballad thousands of years ago. And with that, we've touched on what seem to be the obvious mutations in the legend of Mulan, changes that at various times through Chinese history have reflected virtue and chastity, eroticism and liberation, subtle attempts to erode the ruling legitimacy of foreign barbarian rulers, and finally patriotism, a call for resistance. And then, in 1998, we get the emergence of the most pure theme of all. Cash money, baby.
Yep, this cricket's a lucky one!
The story of 1998 Mulan is easy to map out, and since it came in the era before Disney insisted on making 2.5-hour films, it's also a very tightly told narrative. In less than 90 minutes, you have a daughter who doesn't fit in, who succeeds in infiltrating the army, makes friends, and proves herself a capable soldier, all while dealing with the growing fear of discovery, her blooming feelings of romance for her commanding officer, and a belief that her family back home still consider her a dishonorable failure. In a dramatic climax, and after being stripped of her disguise and exposing her true self to the world, she still slays the imposing threat and saves the day, completely shattering ancient China's glass ceiling, changing society forever, and finishing with a hint that she and her cute boy toy will probably get married. But regardless of bravery and piling accolades, she always had her father's love. I love it. I really do. One of my favorite 90s era Disney films, and I think we can all agree, I'm totally not bi Shang Li is still the cutest prince to emerge from Disney, period. Now, as modern retelling, it's not perfect, and indeed, it has caught a lot of flack. Firstly, there are some things that are plainly historically incorrect, particularly when compared to those first iterations of the myth in the Tang and Ming dynasty. For example, uttering a Buddhist chant when that didn't come in until after the Han dynasty. The Huns invading, which is an odd, narrow choice, since a faction known as the Zhang invaded around 150 BC, who were maybe related to the Huns. Chinese dragons don't breathe fire, and gunpowder wasn't invented until the 9th century. Although considering the Qing version of the myth gets away with this, I think Disney can probably get away with a free pass, even if the eras don't perfectly line up. So definitely some things are historically off, but I don't think these alone are that important. Yes, Disney's film is an appropriation and conflation of Chinese history, but Disney's animated Mulan, for better or worse, elects not to focus on a specific point in history. This allows them to use a vague sense of Chinese-ness as set dressing, which can be ignored, and allows us to focus on the more prominent themes of gender, familial expectations, and maybe budding bisexual feelings. Is it trivializing? Definitely. And if a Chinese audience dislikes it for those reasons and not, say, other things, then who can say they're wrong? But by Disney standards, it's objectively not their worst offense. Compare Mulan to something like Pocahontas, which commits to a specific event with the first colonial ships arriving in North America, and again commits to having a super sexualized Native American fall in love with one of the good colonizers, and then a narrative that the Native Americans are equally bad as the colonizers. I just don't think Mulan is quite at that level. So what does Mulan do well? Well, it makes gender commentary that's palatable for children, and more importantly, makes expert use of a strong, flawed, but still persevering female protagonist, completely humanizing her, and while still letting her do badass things on screen, without making the audience feel pandered to, making us eye roll at how desperately the producers want us to know that a female is leading the film. No, instead they give us a character who is relatable and likable, then a bunch of time is spent developing her, and then in the end when she saves the day, surprise surprise, we really like her. Compare that to, and I hate the example, but Rey in The Force Awakens, showing off her mastery and Jedi skills without ever, being shown to try and fail, dust herself off and try again. No training montages. No, she just wins on her first attempt against the main antagonist at that point in the story, and suddenly you don't care that much because any future stakes have been completely eroded. So if the traditional myth of Mulan pushed for different meaning and significance under different dynasties and points of Chinese history, what agenda is Disney pushing for when it revives this ancient fable? I mean, selling toys and creating a brand and filling cinema seats are a given. That's their first objective and nothing will change that.
$4.99 hamburger Happy Meal.
We can't reach the food.
Patience, Father, patience.
But there are still artists and writers and animators who put thousands of hours of love and affection into producing this film. So what are they saying? Well, I want an excuse to talk through this film, so let's do that. The character of Mulan we start off with is kind of an amalgamation of your average globalized teenager. She loves her family but is resistant to her traditional mold. She's a little lazy and has a dog she likes. She talks with her mouth open and cheats on her exams. With Mulan, the first impression you really get is the "I'm not like other girls" kind of girl. The intended effect is for the audience to say, "She's so random, she's lazy and clumsy, like me." If she was born in the 90s, you just know she'd be a hashtag gamer girl. And that's fine. This is Disney trying to relate to the ordinary person who isn't royalty, the perfect child, or even exceptionally skilled. Her main quality is her resourcefulness, a cleverness that allows her to grasp opportunities and see solutions more quickly than her comrades. More importantly, she's your everyday girl, nothing immediately striking about her personality, making her the perfect plushie for the far-reaching tentacles of Disney's PR team. While Mulan is polite enough to try and fill her parents' desires of marrying a man, her clumsiness comes into play and ruins the entire matchmaking ceremony. And since works of fiction are carefully plotted to overlap with character beats, of course this moment of despair and lack of identity coincides with the military arriving and conscripting a male from every village. As the only man of age, it seems her father is doomed to join and therefore perish in China's imperial army. Ever the kind soul, Mulan won't let that happen, and on a crazy whim she disguises and volunteers herself. It's honestly a scene that's powerful and made to feel almost jarring, with the soundtrack modernizing and blaring these grim but determined synthesizers completely at odds with the previous light melodies and more traditional music. A simple but elegant metaphor for showing how Mulan's choices are discordant and in complete rebellion with the status quo of Imperial China. And she picks up Eddie Murphy and another sidekick. Mulan joining the army again shows her to be awkward, silly, and not fitting in, but it also does a good job at really highlighting how outrageous hypermasculinity can be. The fact that Mulan is a reasonable, intelligent young woman and has to force herself to participate in the unhygienic expulsions and rough play and can't see any nuance in it is equally a joke at her incompetence as well as at the high testosterone environments. Mostly, her time in the training camp pushes two main narrative threads along. Firstly, herself growing accustomed to military lifestyle with the skills she's learning and ingratiating herself into a squad of close friends. Second is her growing relationship with Shang Li. Now, I have to admit, I initially started scripting this video with the intention to review the new live-action film coming out and discuss whether its decision to split Shang Li into two characters was worthwhile. Well, since the old Rona has come along, that's not going to happen, but my gut feeling is it's not going to be spectacular. Even if the two new characters are decent, the live-action film will have the chore of developing two interesting holistic characters, when Shang Li was already really good as one. Like, really good by the standard of Disney love interests, and low-key kinda had a more interesting arc than Mulan. Yes, Mulan's arc is empowering and she finds confidence and validity in herself and convinces others that her value as a person shouldn't be tied to her gender and performance. Yeah, that's good. Really good. But also kind of what you expect from a female lead in old legends and historical fiction. Shang Li, though, my boy, is complex. He's a military son who's the product of nepotism, trying hard to prove that his value and worth isn't tied to his upbringing. He's given an impossible job of training the goofy recruits and rises to the challenge, still keeping composed after his father's death and when likely meeting his own. And there's this genuine hint of bisexuality that he's drawn to, intrigued by, and maybe even enamored with Mulan when she's hiding herself as a boy. Mulan, of course, challenges and changes him, teaching him tolerance and broadening his worldview. The arc there is so fun and, my god, look at those abs. The tonal transition from the recruits singing their way through the Chinese countryside to the sudden dead stop of finding the war-ravaged town and destroyed Imperial army is so damn satisfying. The silly banter of the camp, the budding relationship between Mulan and Shang Li, forget about it, because the world is ending. The fight in the mountains above the Imperial City is so well choreographed. The way the mountains are shaped like a tilted half-pipe, a cut-out cylinder, lends itself to these unreal camera angles and perspective warps. It's not realistic, of course, but it adds a sense of scale and enormity to this battle. enemies pouring down on the recruits like droplets of water running down glass, and Mulan's real talent, her ingenuity and eye for solutions proves useful once again. Honestly, this whole set piece is the highlight of the film. What comes next in the Imperial City is fine enough, but this here lifts the film to greatness, and I just really hope some form of this scene is imported into the live action. By this point, everyone loves Mulan's alter ego, especially Shang Li. Just look at those eyes. You can't tell me he's not feeling a tiny teeny bit bi right now. But the narrative pendulum has to swing back for there to be drama in the next act, and Mulan gets outed as a woman. And when the scribe throws Mulan to the ground, there's something really fucking foul about that. We like and respect Mulan, and so does everyone else, more so after she just saved lives and destroyed the Han army. So seeing this humiliating treatment does a lot to having you puff up your chest and feel a visceral sense of injustice. The rest of the film is pretty cookie cutter. Mulan, with the attention to detail of a grade A lawyer, figures out something's fishy and runs off to save China. She's fobbed off, ignored, cast away because again she's a woman and her voice is worthless. But as the situation grows more desperate, her friends return to her, trust her, and even put into action some of the lessons she's taught them, and together they start to unravel the Hun's hostage situation. My boy Shang Li puts his body on the line and things start to look desperate, but Mulan, for like the third time now, takes the situation into her hands and looks to save China for good. With some quick wits and some kind of brushed over badass martial arts, she puts the Hun leader in the ground. There's probably some metaphor here. Her weapon, the fan, a traditionally female accessory, beats the sword. She's willing to sacrifice the accessory to disarm her foe, outsmarting him, leaving them both bare to the world, stripped of classical gender identifying tools, stripped of all the bullshit, showcasing how binary ideas of gender aren't so important, and yada yada, the sort of stuff your English teacher would probably tell you. The story wraps up nicely. She hugs the Emperor. The father evidently had his own character arc off screen because he's all sweet and says he never cared about that honor stuff anyway. He just wanted his daughter back. Shang Li chases up Mulan after she's left his employment and does it in a super soft, polite way, not abusing his position of power over her, doing everything right by 2020 standards, and god damn it, why can't he be in the live action? Anyway, the end. I don't think we really need to hammer in the themes. They're quite self-evident just talking it out. Women are equally capable, intelligent, and brave, and suppressing their flourishing is not just a disservice to them as individuals, but society as a whole, because when everyone can contribute, everyone can benefit. Like always for Disney, there's an obvious theme of searching for belonging as teenagers come of age, and sprinkle in the liberal values of freedom, romance, and getting what you want out of life, and what you end up with is something that looks like the 1998 Disney adaptation of Mulan, which makes it super fun to compare to what you might call a rebuttal from China, the 2009 live-action release of Mulan: Rise of a Warrior. It's a decent film if you're not already fatigued as hell with the general premise, which I kind of am, but anyway, it's definitely closer to the traditional myth than Disney's remake, including elements of rescuing her kidnapped superior, befriending the enemy princess, and assassinating the opposing leader. So what's new? Well, this film is really gritty. It tries to capture a sense of what war-torn Imperial China would have looked like. And we also get a scene of Mulan becoming an alcoholic, which is fun. But seriously, what sticks out are the different values that are pushed. A lot of Western media pushes for the infinite value of the individual. No cost is too great to save one life. Which we know is kind of bullshit, right? I don't think anyone actually believes this. We all know that there comes a point where we would trade off a life or multiple lives. Like, there's no way the globe would unite for a rescue mission like in The Martian. They'd thank him for his service and then leave him unseen until he starved to death. But we love the idea of it in stories, as fake as it is. But China today is a one-party, socialist, authoritarian, state-capitalist society that, in its political structure alone, emphasizes the value of the collective, the goal, the mission, over individual lives, and this carries forth in the film. Mulan's love interest, Wentai, chastises her early on for trying to save him, admitting he would abandon her if needed. Around the midpoint, Mulan and the rest of her forces abandon their wounded, including her childhood best friend, so they can make a hasty escape, live to fight another day, and those staying behind see it as honourable to perish for the cause. By the film's close, Wentai is betrothed to the princess as a way to repair the fractured empires, but loving Mulan begs her to run away with him. She refuses, of course, because it's not in the best interests of China. It doesn't serve the collective society, and that's the paramount message that Chinese storytellers are now pushing. Well, that's it. Disney's new Mulan remake was meant to release a few weeks ago, but it hasn't, so all we can do now is speculate as to what it's going to try to add to the odd 1500 years of a developing myth. We know they've said they're trying to stick closer to the original mythos, whatever that means, considering there's been dozens of variants, and we know not only have they stripped away a lot of the 1998 fun, but also a lot of the gratuitous additions of sing-alongs, fire-breathing dragons, and slapstick comedy. Disney is now in a spot where they want to capitalize on the massive Chinese market, but it's still also a PG American film, a film that needs to be palatable to the Western families who might want to buy a Happy Meal. Disney have said they want to go back to the story's roots, sure, but don't think for a second we'll see references to being forced into a harem or suicide to preserve chastity. If I had to guess, we're going to get something in the same spirit of the 1998 film, with just a few plot beats from the original mythos thrown in to make sure the film can be properly marketed towards an Eastern audience. So we might see Mulan already betrothed at the film's start. She'll probably rescue one of her kidnapped comrades and befriend some female character in the opposing ranks as a way to humanize the enemy. Already knowing that one of the main villains of the film is a witch, I'm half expecting a redemption story there, that Mulan will bring her to the right side and all things good. Or not, I don't know, but as a Western production, we know that her character will be hung up on finding her own sense of identity, be a bit of a restless teenager and heartbroken that she's lying to herself, and by the end, she will probably choose to embrace love and her individuality as opposed to just being some cog in the machine. Not because those are fundamental Western values, but that's gonna be way more profitable for Disney. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed revisiting the origins of this piece of Chinese antiquity.
Take it, Cookie!
Mythology is a powerful tool for casting a light on a culture in any given period and exposing the shared unconsciousness of that culture, values, meaning, and beliefs that go unspoken. And I think it's pretty cool that we can pick up on different sentiments throughout the different Chinese dynasties and eras. This might be less true today, however, when myths become financialized, just another product that gets eaten up and spat out by the profit motive. There's still something there, but the truths are just going to sparkle a little less brightly. That said, I'm actually pretty keen for the live action release. Yeah, it's a generic story we're well safely familiar with at the moment, but it looks cool, the score sounds amazing, and I just adore those long sweeping shots across the Chinese deserts and plains. It just looks really pretty. And knowing that the first draft of the script somehow had a Caucasian love interest, I'm pretty keen to see what else they might stuff up. Anyway, I'll probably spend a long time talking about that too when it releases, and maybe I'll make more videos like this if people have enjoyed it. So for now, thanks for watching.
Mulan.
Present.
Speaking without permission?
Oops.